So Mormons don't drink coffee. And in their defense, neither do I. You'll always see me sporting a bubbly water. But I don't drink coffee because I don't like the taste of it. It tastes like burnt bean water. And because I don't drink a lot of caffeine because I don't love the way it makes my body feel. So imagine my surprise when one day I realized that they don't drink coffee, but they do drink energy drinks, Red Bulls, Monsters, Alanis. They drink those like they're going out of style, and soda. So you can imagine little old me, who did not grow up around Mormon culture, making the realization that they don't drink coffee and tea. And the reason to me was caffeine, obviously, but they do drink caffeine. And what my brain did in that moment when I was like, oh, okay, so why? Why don't they drink coffee? Why don't they drink tea? But Monster drinks are okay. What is going on here?
So soda is the Mormon version of coffee because we're not supposed to have coffee or tea, so then Mormons have tons of soda.
Would you rather go to war or have a sip of coffee?
Definitely war, because my values prohibit me from drinking coffee, so I just think war is like a better option.
The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives.
And we're gonna show you how to make the perfect dirty soda.
So a few years ago, I was at a conference where it was a lot of like YouTube-y, businessy people, and there were quite a few people who belonged to the Mormon church at this conference. And I happened to get in a conversation with them at dinner because one of the few things that I knew at the time about the Mormon culture was that they didn't drink coffee. And again, I assumed that was because of the caffeine. And we were at this dinner and all of these people had like self-identified as members of the LDS church, and they were drinking Dr. Pepper and Mountain Dew and like all of these things. And so I was so confused, and I asked them why they could drink caffeine if they can't drink coffee. Because honestly, to me, that makes sense. To me, if you're gonna have like a religious standard that is, okay, caffeine is a stimulant, we know that about caffeine, and it's just not good for you, so don't drink it, that actually makes quite a bit of sense. But when it's just coffee or tea, it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And the crazy part was that none of them really knew. I got a lot of like, well, that's just how it is, or I grew up in a family that didn't drink caffeine, but it's not really forbidden, so we drink it now. That's how it is. Like, we don't drink coffee. And then fast forward to like 2 years ago, and I'm on a flight from Charlotte to California, and I lay over in Salt Lake City, Utah. And because I'm me, I sometimes make friends with the people on my plane. You know, I'm the person talking to strangers on planes probably about 60% of the time. Now, sometimes I don't. I read the room. I'm not usually the one to just like full out make that conversation, but if they're willing to make the conversation, it happens on the regular, okay? So I start having conversations with my seatmate. And sure enough, I get in this conversation and he is a Mormon. And he's chugging a Monster energy drink. So naturally, because I don't know boundaries and I will ask anybody anything, I say, hey, so I thought Mormons couldn't drink caffeine. You can't drink coffee, but you can drink Monsters. And his answer was, well, it's because the word of wisdom tells us that. Honestly, if they don't know why, then why do they do it? Is it just an obedience thing? Is it cultural? How did Mormons become one of the only sects of Christianity that don't drink coffee? I knew at a certain point in my life, I had to get to the bottom of this. And friends, today is that day. To really set this up, let me give you like a 90-second summary of the history of the LDS Church. In the early 1800s, a very young 14-year-old Joseph Smith, who is living in upstate New York at the time, has a vision from God that tells him that all other churches and sects of Christianity are bad. A few years later, good old Joe is visited by this angel. This angel's name is Moroni. Moroni is actually the angel on the top of all of the Mormon temples. So when you see the little temples and the golden angel with the little trumpet, that's Moroni, okay? So Moroni pops up and he's like, hey, Joe, I actually know about these golden plates that have things written on them in a language that nobody knows, and they're buried in a location that I'm only gonna tell you about, and I want you to translate them. Okay? And Joe's like, yeah, of course, absolutely. That translation turned into the Book of Mormon. And that was essentially the start of what is now the LDS or Mormon Church. This group continues to grow under the leadership of Joseph Smith, and they eventually migrate to Illinois and then to a few other states before they land in Utah. On their journeys, Joseph Smith starts to write revelations and rules that the church needs to follow, and this becomes the Doctrine and Covenants, which, by the way, Mormons actually have 3 books that they hold to even standards. The Bible, the standard like King James Version Bible, the Book of Mormon, and the Doctrine and Covenants. And apparently they hold all of these things pretty equal, all 3 of these books. So our buddy Joe, he actually didn't make it to Utah. He got killed before he got there, and some new leaders such as like Brigham Young, yes, of BYU University, and people like that rose to leadership, and eventually the group got to Utah. There were a lot of like semantics involved with kind of taking over Utah for the Mormon Church, but that's still where a majority of Mormons live today. Now, I had to figure out where, because I know the Bible, I don't know the Book of Mormon super well, and I don't know the Doctrine and Covenants, but I had to find out where we were getting the no coffee thing from. And apparently it is right here in the Doctrine and Covenants, which were these revelations and rules that Joseph Smith wrote down before he passed away. And referring back to my conversation with my buddy on the plane, I remembered that the specific Doctrine and Covenant that talked about why they don't drink coffee and tea is called the Word of Wisdom. So we tracked that puppy down. In section 89 of the Doctrine and Covenants, we get to the heart of where this all started. There's a few verses that talk about wine and strong drinks and how that is not good for you, but they can drink wine as a sacrament to Jesus as long as they make it themselves. And then verse 8 says, "And again, tobacco is not for the body, neither for the belly, and is not good for man, but is an herb for bruises and all sick cattle, to be used with judgment and skill." And number 9, and again, hot drinks are not for the body or belly. This is it. That is the only place where anything pertaining to what could be coffee or tea or caffeine or hot drinks is mentioned. I literally searched the entire doctrine. I searched the Book of Mormon. This is where this comes from. And it's really interesting to me. I wonder if there's some like lost ones, because he says multiple times in this, and again, strong drinks are not for the belly, and again, tobacco is not for the body, and again, hot drinks, and again, verily I say unto you. But I don't know where the again is. Like, I don't know where the first one was, because there aren't anymore. So that's interesting and not part of this video, but whatever. Now, it's pretty clear that strong drinks and wine is referring to alcohol. And throughout the years, church prophets and church leaders began to understand that hot drinks meant coffee or tea, hot or cold. There's even a whole post on churchofjesuschrist.org that says that the Doctrine and Covenants say coffee and tea. They do not. The Doctrine and Covenants say hot drinks, but there is an entire post that says, it's coffee and tea, guys. What you talking about? And then on the website, they even make the claim that there are scientific studies that show that Mormons live longer than other people because they don't drink coffee and tea. And so they have this whole messaging that's like, look, Joseph Smith was right. This works. Because we don't drink coffee and tea, we live longer. See how all of this works together. But here's the deal. It was only actually a few years ago, like less than 15 years ago, that the church took a strong, like black and white stance on what this hot liquids meant. And yes, I know it's still not black and white, but we're gonna get there. But at least at this point, it does make sense that hot liquids only refers to hot liquids and not to things like Dr. Pepper. But it wasn't until 2012 that was actually made like church doctrine. I'm getting ahead of myself, and that's a fun story, but it wasn't that long ago. And for the sake of making this just slightly more confusing, I said a second ago that this applied to coffee and tea, both hot and cold. And sure, that kind of makes sense. If you know how coffee and tea are made, they have to be brewed, they have to be hot first before they can be cold. So if you have to make something hot, then it can't be consumed cold either. Okay, I get that. But this rule does not apply to hot water or hot chocolate. Hiram Smith made that clear in 1833. So do you remember the group that I mentioned that I had dinner with like years ago at a business conference? They all said something really interesting, and that was that they grew up in households that didn't drink caffeine. But as they got older and things like that, those households either got lax, or as they became adults, they got lax about it, and now they drink caffeine. And according to them and my research, there were definitely LDS families who never really considered this kind of ban on coffee and tea to extend into all caffeine, but they were in the minority for sure. And here's the thing, the church actually pushed this narrative too. They pushed the narrative that caffeine was bad. And BYU, Brigham Young University, like the most common famous Mormon university in the United States, was completely caffeine free until 2017. And so that kind of just proves the point that they wouldn't have been caffeine free if they didn't think caffeine was a problem. And at some point, this changed. The post on the LDS website that I referenced earlier that said like, hey, yeah, this just refers to coffee and tea, did not show up on their website until 2012. So before that, it was not so cut and dry, and it had kind of been interpreted and promoted that caffeine is a no-no for Mormons. And again, as someone looking from the outside in, that made total sense to me. Caffeine, stimulant, we stay away from it, got it. Like, makes sense. But again, that's clearly what's not going on, at least now in 2025. Swig, which is a soda shop that's popular in Mormon heavy states like Utah and Idaho, is a soda shop. And those sodas are generally caffeinated. We see members of the LDS Church on TV drinking caffeine. And before 2012, there was no official statement from the LDS Church at all concerning sodas and things that are kind of in the obscure land of caffeine. Nothing. Like I say, there was a few prophets or things that would say things, but there was no statement from the church. So what happened in 2012 to change all of this? Mitt Romney. Mitt freaking Romney. Mitt Romney, who is a fifth generation LDS church member, was running for president against Obama in 2012. And he liked him some Diet Coke. He was pictured drinking it. His wife said in an article or in an interview that he liked to drink it. And it was pretty commonly known that Mitt Romney, a Mormon, liked caffeinated Diet Coke. But people were confused. Like, even people in the LDS church were confused because, again, a lot of them had grown up or thought that caffeine bad, not just coffee and tea bad, caffeine bad. And so to see this man who was now in the public eye representing, the Mormon faith and the LDS church holding a Diet Coke, people in and outside of the church were confused. On August 23rd, 2012, NBC runs a 1-hour special called Mormon in America. We had a Mormon man running for president, and because the LDS church is pretty geographically skewed on one side of the United States, not everyone in the US was familiar with the Mormon faith or the LDS church. So NBC decided to roll a special explaining the Mormon faith. And in this special, they say that Mormons cannot drink caffeine, and they include soft drinks in this statement. And then 6 days later, on August 29th, 2012, the LDS Church releases a statement that clarifies several things about the interview. And in that statement, they say this. Finally, another small correction. Despite what was reported, the Church Revelation spelling out health practices, Doctrine and Covenants 89, does not mention the use of caffeine. The church's health guidelines prohibit alcoholic drinks, smoking or chewing of tobacco, and hot drinks, taught by church leaders to refer specifically to tea and coffee. And this was the first time the church had ever made a statement so clearly about where they stood on the caffeine situation. Like I say, a few church leaders had been like, I don't drink caffeine and I don't think you should either. But there was not ever a technical line in the sand with this is okay, this is not okay, and this is why, until this statement because of the NBC special that ran because Mitt Romney was running for president. Now, obviously, the LDS Church wanted Mitt Romney to be president. They wanted a Mormon in the White House. And Mitt Romney publicly and unabashedly partook in some Diet Coke. So they weren't gonna let him look like a bad Mormon or look like the faith was not clear on these rules. So they came out and they were like, no, caffeine's cool, just no hot coffee or tea, or also cold coffee or tea, because hot coffee and tea also means cold. Clear? Yeah. And this is actually what started this major soda culture invigoration inside Mormon communities and inside states like Utah, Arizona, Idaho. They now had explicit permission to drink caffeine, and boy did they. Since that statement 13 years ago when the LDS Church gave the green light to soda, Swig's business skyrocketed. Dirty sodas went viral. I'm sure we've all seen those like dirty soda recipes on TikTok. That started from Mormon influencers. And to really solidify that the church was now okay with soft drinks, these bubbly, delicious refreshments started being sold at BYU in 2017 after like 142 years of being a caffeine-free campus. Don't you know those kids were like hyped up on caffeine? It was probably like the worst day ever on campus. The church's need for Mitt Romney to look good and not look like he was breaking any Mormon rules led to a huge boom in soda sales in Utah. And get this, remember how the Stanley Cup like rose to fame all of a sudden around this same time? Well, there's a site called the Buy Guide, and it was founded by 3 Mormon moms. And it's kind of one of those like sites that kind of tells you what's trending and all of those kinds of things before influencers were really influencers. The Buy Guide had a huge following and was like super popular, and they promoted these 40-ounce with the handle and the straw Stanley Cups that have become so popular now. And when they promoted them as a way to keep your beverages cold for hours. And considering after this 2012 announcement from the church, about 70% of Mormons now do drink soda in some way, we can assume that the beverages they were keeping cold were sodas, because they didn't just say like, keeps your water cold, right? So inadvertently, Mitt Romney saved the Stanley Cup. And that's probably my favorite rabbit hole I've ever went down. I wonder if he puts that on his resume. I would. I'd be like, hey, those cups that everybody's carrying around, yeah, that was me. Even after the great soda acceptance of 2012, the rules around hot liquids are still pretty blurry. Honestly. Hot liquids means coffee or tea, hot or cold, but it doesn't mean hot chocolate or hot water. And all of this comes back to good old Joe Smith, who said one day, and again, hot drinks are not for the body or belly, and literally gave no other explanation. Nothing. This rule gets a lot of attention because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But honestly, all religions have rules and standards and things that they do that don't make a lot of sense, even to the members inside of them if they think about it. Religious rules aren't always logical. Honestly, they're probably not even mostly logical. They're usually inconsistent, and some people follow them and some people don't. And listen, trust me, I'm sitting here in the Bible Belt of the USA, so we could talk for days about the rules that people impose that they don't actually follow. But I don't think that it being a rule that makes sense is why people follow it. I think it's just bigger than that. These types of rules, these types of standards, these type of things kind of just say who's in and who's out. And honestly, whether it's coffee or tea or hot chocolate or caffeine or clothing or whatever, the people who follow the rules likely do not care whether this makes sense or not. They just like being part of the in crowd, and it keeps them in the favor of their religion. So the people who stay in the Mormon faith or any other faith that has like kind of weird or not really make sensical rules is because they don't care. They're not questioning. They're not like, why is this a thing? The people who say, why is this a thing, leave, right? Because they can't ever find a good answer. But the people who stay and are dedicated to this faith, this one and a million others that have things very similar, they're not asking that question. They're just saying, okay, but to be a part of this religion, I have to do this thing. I don't need to know why. Now, this girl has been asking why since 1986. So for me, because I said so is not an adequate answer. Sorry, Mom. Sorry, Dad. But if you've ever wondered why Mormons don't drink coffee, why they can drink caffeine and not coffee or tea, That's it. In Doctrine and Covenants 89, verse 9, it tells them that they can't drink hot drinks. And for years, the church interpreted that as all caffeine because, why else would we not be able to drink hot drinks? And then Mitt Romney changed all that in 2012. And now it's literally just coffee and tea, and there's no other real explanation for it.